not remember what that stands for.
Value.
Time value?
Yeah.
Oh, that makes sense. Time value. If you're a Nikon shooter, it says SP for shutter priority, but if you're Canon, time
I
value.
realized I put that in my slide too.
That's great. That totally makes sense. So the time your shutter is open and closed. So TV, time value.
Okay.
So Hannah's going to talk about why you would use that, and then we're going to do some stuff with time value, shutter.
So the shutter priority is also called time value. It refers to setting on some cameras that allows the user to choose a shutter speed while the camera adjusts the aperture to ensure the correct exposure. So shutter priority mode allows you to change the shutter speed to the duration of what light your camera sensor is reading. So the slower the shutter speed, the more light is received by the image sensor. So the faster is less light to the image sensor. So you can take full control of the shutter speed if you just experiment with looking through your viewfinder and your camera to get the ideal photo. So the shutter speed is just like the aperture, but instead of the aperture, it adjusts the shutter speed to your liking, so you choose that over the aperture. So the next, so some of the things you can use with shutter priority is you can be able to capture something like creative with freezing light or motion blur, and then you can do something with a shallow depth of field and create, I lost my spot, like a blur motion. So, and then the next is manual mode.
So that's kind of what we're going to do. We're gonna do a couple images with the dice where we're going to stop the motion and we're going to drag the motion. And then we're also going to do that with Kayla, where she's going to actually make a movement for us, and we're going to try to freeze the movement, and then we're going to try to drag the movement out. So you can imagine, does anyone like to photograph children? So if you like to photograph children, this is always my go-to one, is like the parents are usually just hanging out in the photo, and they're still, they're kind of together, and they're always like, my kids are crazy, they're gonna be nuts, they're wild. And I'm like, listen, I was an elementary school teacher for a while, I can handle this. And they're like, no, it's not like that. And so I always make a deal with them. I'm like, I got this awesome shoot I want to do with you at the end, and I'm going to have like this kind of contest between you and your parents, but they don't know the rules. Whoever smiles the best, they get a prize. But I'm not going to tell your parents that. And they're always like, oh my gosh. So it's like we have this secret the whole time. And then at the very end, I'll say to the parents, I'm like, okay, well, here's the thing. You didn't know that we actually had this contest going on, but I'm going to have your kids run around you really, really fast because they've got something to tell you. And then they're like, wow, freaking out. So they run around the parents really fast while I'm telling the parents about this, and the parents are laughing because their kids are running and we're done with the shoot. But I'm using a slow shutter speed. So the kids are like in motion, dragging around, which is kind of a fun shot to do with the family, because that's what kids do. And then I'll do it with stopping the shutter too. So there's lots of really fun ways that you can incorporate the shutter speed into shoots too. So we're gonna keep it at 1600 right now, because the first one I wanna do is we're gonna roll the dice to stop the action, okay? So the rule of thumb generally, if you're shooting sports photos specifically, if there's a lot of movement or NASCAR, you want to have 1/500th of a second or faster, okay? This is not going to be NASCAR or athletes. So we can probably get away with 1/250th of a second. So it'll look like a fraction. So you're going to want to now change your shutter, which is going to just be on the dial. So it's just going to be this right here. Yep. And it will be 1/250. Okay, so what we're going to want to do is I'm going to have you guys just put 2 dice down, and those are going to be the dice you focus on, okay? So focus on the 2 dice, And then what your partner is gonna do is they're gonna roll the dice behind, and you guys are gonna wanna try to get it timed up so it's the same. Now, remember last week I told you about continuous shoot mode? Did we talk about that? Where if you hold the shutter down, it shoots like da-da-da-da-da-da. Did we talk about that? Oh, great, okay. This is awesome. So, your mode on your camera, you see where it says set on the back? Right here? Click on, it looks like a stack of paper. If you click on that, we want to go to continuous shooting. So that will be, when you hold the shutter down, it'll just keep shooting.
Oh, I wanted that one.
Sorry, let's go, click on this one.
You can use that, you need to shoot sports too. I'll start
Okay.
putting up a little bit.
So you'll just hit that once and then you'll move it
Higher
to
than
there.
250 probably.
Yeah, I would do over 500.
Continuous
no.
shooting,
Yep.
and then hit select. So now when you take the photo, when you hold down your shutter, I don't want you guys to let it up, okay? Because we are not gonna roll the dice until we hear you click, and then we'll roll it, okay? So focus on the 2 dice that are there. And then once we hear you're focused and you start shooting, then we're gonna roll the dice. Good.
You got it?
Lower this a bit.
Now, of
Just
course,
hold
there's
your
gonna be a
shutter
lot
down.
of photos that are just gonna be not great, right? But you should see that the dice have been
Can
stopped,
it work like that? It doesn't.
okay? The action has been stopped, right?
Go ahead. Just try to take another step back and do it.
Okay.
So that would be with the fast shutter speed. So if you wanted to get,
All
Okay,
right.
so go ahead and do it.
kids
and just
jumping
hold your
or
shutter.
something that's not crazy fast, you'd set your shutter speed faster, okay?
And I probably should be putting one more.
All right, let's try it one more time and then we'll do the opposite.
And I don't care how many happen. Yeah.
So it freezes the action. Now, opposite of that
And click your
would be dragging the action, okay? So to drag the action, we're gonna need a slow shutter speed. Now the problem with this is we don't have any tripods for you guys, but we're gonna go the slowest we can go, hand holding the cameras, okay? So let's go to 1/30th of a second. 1/30. And yeah, and you're gonna wanna get into a spot where you are holding that as still as possible. So generally, you're never gonna wanna shoot this slow of a shutter speed without a tripod. But we're gonna try it, cause I want you guys to see that. So just get yourself in a really, yeah, that's perfect, using yourself. And, oh.
Maybe we can do that.
So we're gonna do the same thing, and now we should see some dragging. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Another.
Are you ready?
I've got another SD card there. That's just not-
Oh, yeah, go to your thing.
Wanna do it one more time?
I
Yeah.
think if you just hit play.
Oh, and here's the guys. My one.
So see the dragging? So that's really fun to do. I mean, you could do that with water. You know, we've done ones where we have colored water and drop strawberries in them and the water splashes out. So you could see how that could be really fun to do if, you know, like, let's say for example, you wanted to get the streets and the cars downtown or something at
I
night.
have it on my
Then you see that dragging. Let's do a few more of those. That's called dragging the shutter. Michaela. We'll get you back over there again.
Okay.
Oh, I see what you're doing. So play around with doing, you know, both of those and give yourself some scenarios in your head, okay? That's like, you're not quite shooting manual mode, but it's a step there, right? You're just controlling one of the things at a time. All right, let's do the same thing now with a portrait, okay? So come on over here. Yeah, I think so. So I'll have the three photographers right here, facing Kayla. Mine are self-up over there. Because you guys can all probably, here, Linda, I'll switch your spots. Because you guys can probably all shoot this from different directions. Because what I'm gonna have Kayla do is she's gonna try to hold her hands very still in her body, so hold on to that. And all you're gonna do is back and forth with your hair, okay? So, what's gonna happen in this case? What do you guys think is gonna happen? Yes, and when her hair's moving back and forth, her body, she's gonna try to keep as still as possible. And then she's just moving her hair back and forth, and that hair should be dragging, okay? So you gotta rock star that.
My hips are really good.
It's really all right. Ready?
Yeah.
Go. Faster.
Oh, okay.
Okay, good. Do we see movement in her hair?
Yeah. I was a little late on the play, but I got one decent one.
Oh, that's cute.
And you'll see movement in her face. It won't be quite as sharp, right? That's because our shutter speed is slow. It's not because your photo's out of focus. It's motion blur, which is could be cool. Okay. So now we're going to do one where we're going to stop the action. Same exact thing. So what shutter speed do we need to be at to stop the action?
250.
Yes. You can even go faster. I mean, you can never go too fast to stop the action. It just depends on how much light you have available to you.
Oh, I'd like to be higher on
So if she was a sprinter, or if we're shooting NASCAR, you need to be at minimum 1/500, because
Yeah.
you can't capture, or like if someone was playing basketball or something like that, that fast movement, like, or a toddler, you have to be 1/500 or faster. Just keep that in your head. But for this situation, this will totally work. Okay. All right, same thing. You ever had this many photos of yourself? Good, that's good. So now you should see a difference where the action has been stopped. So you could think of, like, if you're photographing someone who's like jumping off, you know, like a lot of times when I'm photographing seniors, if they're in cheer or dance, then I'll have them like jumping off a ledge or something like that, and I want to stop the action. So I set my shutter to 1/500, and I always shoot in manual, but if I was shooting in shutter priority, I'd shoot it to 1/500, then I'd just shoot. Because then I know that the action is stopped. Does that make sense again? Okay, perfect. So let's go into manual, and then we're gonna do a little bit more shooting. So you guys probably, most of those photos are just gonna be trash, but I want you to look at them, you know, when you get them on your computer, or your phone, so you can see the difference. Yeah. All right, so let's get into manual. Now, we talked about that last week, and you guys don't have to shoot anything in manual mode. If you like one of these modes and it works for what you wanna do,
I like this.
go for it. Yeah, because then you know. But I'm gonna have her explain a little bit more about manual mode, because once you feel like you're graduating from aperture priority or shutter, then you know you can move on to that. But I'll tell you what, many professional photographers, many of them choose one of these modes, and that's just what they shoot in.
Like aperture or...
Aperture or shutter, yep. I know a lot of photographers who shoot sports, and they always shoot everything in shutter priority, everything. Because they want to make sure that they don't miss anything. And then I have a lot of portrait photographer friends who shoot almost everything in aperture priority mode, because they want that 4.5 kind of, you know, bokeh sort of
I
look.
don't know many photographers that use a manual.
Yeah, well, I'll always shoot manual. These guys always shoot manual, because we want 100% control all the time.
Okay.
But it takes a lot more time, muscle memory and practice, and a lot more time. But they're going to school for it, so.
But, yeah, otherwise, most of them
Are gonna
it.
shoot, yep, aperture or shutter, yep.
Yeah.
All right, Hannah.
So like she said, manual mode allows the photographer to determine the exposure of the image by letting you change the aperture value and the shutter speed. So you get the full control of what you want your camera to do. So these, you can change you can get the best settings for your exposure by knowing just a little bit more about your camera with these modes. So if you kind of like what she said with the bokeh, you want to focus on like a wide aperture, and then the motion blur, like what you guys just practiced with like a slower shutter speed. So you can do that manually as well, but with those other two modes, they're just kind of easier to access like right away instead of like learning all yourself right from the start. So once you learn kind of like the exposure triangle, you can adjust your ISO, your aperture, and your shutter speed to create the perfect capture the perfect image for any setting or any situation you're thrown into. So with manual mode, you can kind of fully harness the power of your camera by allowing to adapt to any photo you want to take. So with just all those modes put together, your aperture priority, you want to, when you practice that, you just kind of want to practice on what you want for the foreground to be. And that kind of just gives you the best range with that. And then the shutter priority, like she said, with like fast motion or anything where you need to have your shutter speed be the main thing you're focused on to get that perfect shot. And then with the manual mode, you can change all three of those and do it yourself instead of have your camera determined, so you can have the full control over that. But with the manual mode, it's kind of hard to learn right away because you have to remember like all the settings to get that perfect exposure with that. But with just those simple priority modes, it can help you attain what you're looking for in your image.
Perfect. So we're gonna actually photograph some portraits again of Kayla, and we're gonna try to do this in a manual mode. And so we're gonna use the same light quality here so I can walk you guys through what the settings should be. This is quite a bit more challenging for sure, but if you're finding that aperture priority and shutter priority is not giving you what you want and you want to challenge yourself a little bit, then I just want you guys to have a bit of a background on how this works, okay? So Kayla, why don't you come back over here, and I'm gonna bring you guys photographers over also. So Kayla, at this time, let's do something. Okay. So I want to keep your ISO at 1600 again, okay? So let's just keep, that's where you're at still, right? Okay. So you guys are going to be taking a light meter reading off of Kayla. And we did this last week, where you push your shutter down halfway, and then you can look to see where that light meter moved back and forth. But what you have to do is you have to hold the camera up to her face. So you look through, yep. And then if you push your shutter down halfway, do you guys see that line that'll move back and forth? Mm-hmm. So you want to get that to the 0 mark. That's the goal. And right now we're on, what are we on, shutter priority? You're on manual, okay. So right now we gotta roll this guy all the way, he's gotta get all the way in this ballpark here. We were just way too far, and sometimes if it's too far, it just won't ever register. So now we're controlling the light source manually. I think you guys, your aperture, because yeah, yours registered at 4.5. Yeah, go ahead and take it. So exposure is perfect because you got that lined up there. That's, you know, exposure is really, really nice. Now, I'm going to move her in a different light situation. now. So now I'm gonna move her where she doesn't have quite as much light on her. So let's sit down. And now she's coming from all this window light coming from above to much less window light. So you'll point, and I'm gonna stand here and block some of it. So you're gonna point at her face again, and you'll notice that you're gonna have to move your shutter speed, right? Because now there's less light hitting her. And usually you always have to press your shutter speed halfway to see where that line is. Yeah, it's probably a little bit too bright still, but let's see, take it again. Oh yeah, yep, perfect. So that's kind of how manual mode works. You know, you'll have to, there's a lot more to think about, okay? So I'm not expecting you guys to shoot in manual mode at all. But who thinks they like aperture value more? And then shutter value? I just wanted you to kind of have a little taste of manual mode so you know what it does. And that's when you control everything. But for now, I would really just pick, you ask yourself, how do I want this photo to look? Say you're out in a field of sunflowers. I wish. And we wanted the whole field of sunflowers in super sharp focus from foreground to background. And if I pick aperture value, then I'd want my aperture value to be the highest number possible. So I'd set it at that, and then I'd shoot, okay? So this cheat sheet here is on the website for you guys. I would encourage you to either take a photo of that or screen shoot it, because sometimes when you're out on the field, you're like, oh, I forgot what she said. If I want everything in out of focus, foreground to background, is that a high aperture or a low, okay? And then there's a lot of videos that will explain that too. If you guys took a look at that website, that will be very, very helpful for you. So here's what we're gonna do. We've got a few more minutes. We've got about 10 minutes, 9 minutes left. I'm gonna set you guys back up at your tables and go back to either shutter or aperture priority mode or whatever, or manual if you want to. And between you and your partner, you guys can do a few more of those shots where you're dragging the shutter. Give yourself a scenario. Okay, this time I want it to look like this, okay? And so then try to get that setting correct. There's also cards that they could throw out too. Okay, so give yourself a scenario. Okay, this time I want one thing to be in focus. And say it out loud so then they can test you. Okay? I'm gonna give you a few minutes on that.